I'm here with Cerys Evans, who's currently the president of the Students' Union. So Cerys, why do you want to run again?
I mean, firstly, I absolutely love my job. I think it's a fantastic job. It's really exciting that we've got so many people running. And the reason that I want to go again is because I think I've got more to give. I think students really benefit from consistency within the officer team, because it takes so long to actually get going in the role. It takes like 3 months before you've sort of done induction and you know what you're doing. It takes 6 months before you're actually good at your job. And so you kind of only get 3 months before they're then ready to kick you out again, where you're actually good at your job and you're relevant, if you like. And so what what students benefit from, in my opinion, is then having an officer in a second year, because you then get a proper 12 months where you've already been inducted, you already know what you're doing, you already worked with like the union staff, the university staff. So I think that like students will benefit from having consistency within the officer team, with me running in the same role, but also because I still have more to do. I feel like my work isn't finished. I want to see the new officer structure through its first year, and I want to continue building on the stuff that we learned from in the last 6 months to make sure that it's even better next year.
Yeah, so if we go straight into what you've accomplished in your time so far as president, what have you been proudest of?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think there's been so much that's going on, that's, and it's really ramped up in sort of recent months. I think the officer review is massive. It really proved that we can make change at LUSU, that it's possible for new things to happen. I think it sets a groundwork for going into future years where we're looking at how we can better support and improve the LCO system, the JCRs, how we can better support them to do what they want to do rather than getting stuck doing things that they feel under-supported with. I think that is a really great piece of work I'm super proud of. I secured a rent freeze on campus, which is kind of insane. It was only for a small number of rooms, but it's the only successful campaigning for change in rent on campus that we've had since 2015, which was awesome. I had my national TV moment, advocating for students. I wasn't technically on the clock at the time, but it was an opportunity to use my experience in this job to just share with not just Lancaster but with the country about how difficult it is to be a student at the minute, and that's something I'm so passionate about. And yeah, I those opportunities don't come around very often. I have been to Parliament twice, talking about the cost of living, talking about the housing crisis. I've been on panels for national conferences. Not only have I made change here in Lancaster, but I'm also contributing to the wider national conversation, and I think that's such an honour for me and also for Lancaster to be part of that conversation at such a high level.
Now, specifically to talk about the students' cost of living crisis, that's been a big point of campaigning for virtually every candidate in the race, regardless of position. There's so much which students would like to see done, which candidates would like to see done. Are you satisfied with the progress that the SU has made during your time as president, and how much further would you like to go?
So it's really interesting that you say that, because it's not explicitly on my official manifesto. That's my official manifesto focuses on the new things I want to do, because I think my whole platform is kind of based on this idea that we can keep the momentum of what we've done so far. So I still absolutely want to see that continuing, but I didn't see much use in using my word limit to say I want to keep doing a good job. So I think that what we've done is great. I think we've done some amazing stuff for cost of living in what has sometimes been quite an adversarial environment, in terms of getting funding, the Save Our Supper sort of campaign. And we're actually currently waiting to hear the results of that. I'm expecting to hear from the sort of funding body at the university, their decision in the next couple of days. So hopefully I'll have good news on how successful that campaigning has been. But what we have delivered so far this year is hundreds and hundreds of meals for students, and we've gathered so much information on the kinds of people who are accessing that food, the kinds of people who really need the support. And I think there is never enough, honestly. Enough would be a complete rehaul of the funding system for higher education, of the maintenance loans for home students, looking at how we support international students, that would be enough. And we're not going to get that, certainly not in a couple of months. But I do think that what we have delivered has been really necessary and important. And my hope is that we can keep doing that. A lot of the way that you get this stuff done is through these conversations with the university, and it really relies on having that relationship and that understanding of the climate. As much as I sometimes want to, you can't go into every room screaming. You can't go into every room demanding the world. You have to go in with I understand that there is financial challenges in the sector and I'm interested in how we could progress as a partner. There's a lot of that stuff that can be frustrating for student leaders because sometimes we want to scream and we should be able to have this political action, like Save Our Supper. But the benefit of having someone who can be professional, who has those relationships, who knows how to go into those rooms and can deliver results as I've proved this year, by doing a second year, if the students will have me, I can move forward in those conversations and continue with the same pressure so that there isn't this sense of, there's no officers, they're in training. The reason that we didn't have supper club stuff in first term was because the previous team missed the deadline. And so there's no way that we can do anything as a new team. And by having continuity, you don't miss that because you've not got people sitting around waiting to leave, and you've not got that induction time.
I mean, continuity keeps things smoother, but a change, it can bring in fresh ideas, a fresh perspective. Do you think that there's a valid concern that staying in the role for 2 years means you have a bit more out of the role as a student? It will have been 2 years since you've been a student at Lancaster University. Is the potential that you become a bit more out of touch with concerns of current students?
No, I think that's a really, really valid point. And I think that is something to be really concerned about when you've got someone who isn't actively trying to stay in touch. I must admit, I have never claimed to be in touch with what cool students think because I've never been a cool student. But what I do love is I love learning about other people's experiences. I'm not an international student, but I really go out of my way to have a chat with, to meet with international students, to learn what they are facing, what they need. Similarly with colleges, with JCRs, I was never on a JCR, I'm very open about that. But by being open and by having sort of conversations with leaders, with students who are experiencing hardship, who are experiencing problems, that's how we learn. Everything that's in my manifesto actually comes out of a thing that a student has suggested to me. They're not even my ideas, I must admit. They've come out of people going, why is the room booking system so terrible? And I'm like, yeah, you're right. Like, I don't use that in my day-to-day, but actually, let me look into that. Let me find out, why is it so difficult to book a college bar? Why is it so difficult to book during teaching time? All of those ideas come from direct student experiences. So even though I'm not a student right now, and that is a completely valid concern, I think I am someone who is openly and actively engaging with student voices every day as part of my job. And
to move on to a couple of your manifesto points, you've talked about wanting to improve digital systems, which is obviously quite a broad thing.
Yeah.
So have you got some more specifics there about what you'd
Absolutely.
Like to change?
100%. We were chatting before about how the word limit makes it really hard to say all the things you want to say. Specifically, that's talking about, the two main areas is the LUSU website and the room bookings system or the lack thereof. So the website, a lot of people use it, most societies will use it. And really that comes from, it's been many, many years of people suggesting that we should redo the website. Part of the sort of newness of what I'd like to suggest is more a maintenance model where we have better support and training for societies as part of the reaffiliation process to teach you how to update your website, how to make sure that we have appropriate handovers to make sure that, we've not got a million different Instagram accounts for each society because passwords get lost. I think part of that is working in partnership with student leaders to help them access the support they need because not everyone is going to have a background in computer science. And as well as that, the way we can do that is by working in the back end to improve the accessibility of that website, in making sure that it's easier to update stuff, it's easier to get access. I think it's great that we've really made progress with that in the last couple of years, but there's still a long way to go in making the website actually usable. And room bookings is basically for any sort of societies, sports teams, JCRs, anybody. It's really difficult to book a room. They get cancelled last minute. They're also not all on one system. Some rooms are on a completely separate system. Some rooms you have to email a very specific person who you have to know first. It's a very confusing system. I'd quite like to just bring that all into one easy to access place, or at the very least, because that's run from a university end, if that's not something that is negotiable from their end, then having a way that we as a students union can lay out, here is exactly who you should contact if you want to book this room, so that students aren't getting lost and confused in a maze of university systems.
Now, part of the role of president, which is a bit of the new job with the changes to the officer structure, you'll be in charge of liaising with the JCRs and the college presidents. Could you explain a little bit more about what you've got in mind there and how you'd want to work closely with them?
Absolutely. And I think this is something where I am really, really, open and honest about the fact that I don't have personal experience of leading a JCR or of being on a JCR. I was fortunate enough to live with an entire flat of JCR in my first and second year because those are the kind of people that I stuck to. So I have some sort of outsider experience through my time at university. And then as president, I've had the privilege of working with the presidents, of working with various JCR people, on different projects. And I think that what I bring, hopefully, is a fresh perspective. I think sometimes what we see is JCR presidents who come into this, the JCR officer role, which previously would have been union development, this year it's president, coming in because they loved being JCR president and they just want to be JCR president again, and not necessarily having an understanding that different colleges want different things, or an understanding that actually being president of the union is very different from being president of a college. And so I think for me, I think it's important to remember that having experience in that role isn't necessarily the only way you can be good at supporting that role. I like to think that, I have good working relationships with the current president team, I would hope, if you're watching, and that I would be able to continue that, because one of the funny parts of JCRs is that their year runs alongside. So they run January to January and we run July to July, or, June. And so the current college cohort will run through the first half of the president's year. And that's often most affected by induction, because when you have a new set of officers, a new, JCR officer, you have several months where they're not really settled yet. My hope is that because I'm already president, I continue to be president, that my work with the current union development officer to do some of that handover, to do some of that induction, all the meetings we've had were like, by the way, in July, you'll have a new person, it'll be whoever the president is. My hope is that that will have a really smooth transition, and that I can continue to learn from the JCRs themselves what they want it to look like, because my job is just to support them, not to tell them what to do. But
in some ways, it's kind of a bit of an ironic position here, on this specific aspect of the job, because it's a new responsibility of the president, so it's not something you've taken on at the moment. And because every other candidate for president has got JCR experience, either as a current or former president or currently serving on a JCR, despite being incumbent, you've got the least experience of any of the candidates in this regard. Is that a weakness of your campaign, do you think?
I mean, I'll be completely honest. I think you're right. I think it could absolutely be seen as a weakness. And I think it's the area that I'm most aware of. It's one that when I've been planning my campaign, when I've been planning to sort of lead up to this and thinking about this for the last couple of months, to be honest, I've been really aware of that I'm never going to have that level of JCR experience. I couldn't join a JCR. There is nothing I can do to change that level of experience. But what I can do is better understand the systems that the JCR exist in. I started a project a few months ago in sort of collaboration with JCRs to look at the welcome reps specifically. I was frustrated that with all of the national press stuff that got kind of pushed back a little bit and then has been pushed beyond elections because we can't work on that during elections. But I'm really excited that I'm already working with some of the core SCR and the JCRs. So I think, you know, I'm not going to sit here and be like, no, I do have the experience. But I do want to recognise that actually I don't believe it is a weakness that means that it's not worth voting for me. I think that, you know, I know that I've already got some endorsements from, you know, various people who are on JCR, who've been on JCR, because they know that an effective president is an effective representation. The job of the president, the job of union development now, whoever is responsible for colleges, their job isn't to run a college. Their job is to know how to talk to the university about those problems, to liaise with the union, to bring in our brilliant staff, and to address problems. I think I'm the best person to do that because I know who to talk to, how to talk to them, and I already have good working relationships. So when presidents come to me and say, this event has got this problem, I can say, right, I know exactly who you need to speak to, and I can get you in touch with Barry in facilities or something, you know. And so I think what JCRs actually need isn't someone to tell them what to do or how to do it. It's someone to be kind of a cheerleader for them and a support person who's there every step of the way. And I think that I've proven that I'm reliable and that I can be that person.
Part of the job of president is to take a look at the bigger picture and larger, longer term issues which affect students, and one which has been a frequent theme in the past few years has been strikes. In the last academic year we had the strike over pensions and then a separate strike over pay and working conditions. Now the pensions strike has been resolved, but the pay and working conditions ones, it's not been. There was a ballot to start this academic year, and although the majority of members voted in favour, turnout was too low to continue to strike. So the strike's not on at the moment. There haven't been strikes during term time whilst you've been serving as president, but it looks likely that in the near future they come back, and if you're re-elected you'll probably be dealing with strikes. What would your approach be?
So I sit on council, I'm a governor of the university, and that means that I can influence the decisions of the university in favour of what students want, what students need. And the important thing to remember is that our postgraduate research students are often also teaching, they're often also part of these same unions. It's about supporting our members, and members on the whole support that their staff should be well remunerated, well taken care of, they should have good working conditions. Yeah.
So you've got a specific problem there, though, of at once wanting to represent students, but that includes students who will be on strike because they're graduate teaching assistants in addition to their, to being at the university as students. So firstly, do you broadly support the demands for increased pay and better working conditions? And secondly, how do you balance that with having to represent the interests of the majority of students who will be disrupted by strikes?
Absolutely. I think the main thing is making sure that we mitigate the effects of strikes while also acknowledging the need for them. Do I support appropriate pay and working conditions for staff? Absolutely, I do. As being president, I've had conversations with academics across different departments about their experiences of working in academia, and it's, the funding model that we have for universities currently doesn't work. It doesn't help students, it doesn't help staff, it doesn't really help anybody. And ultimately that's where the problem lies, and that remit falls firmly within the government. And with the new election coming up, it's really important that as students we show up and we have our say in that, because the funding model needs fixing. Your second question was about students who'll be affected. Yeah, I think that strikes are inherently impactful. My student journey, I didn't have a single term that didn't have strikes in it. I was part of the year that got hit really, really heavily by strikes and by COVID, and there wasn't a normal moment really. And so I know just as much as any student how devastatingly impactful it can be, and how frustrating it is to be constantly caught in a cycle of strikes with seemingly no resolution. And I think that's why the job of the Students' Union, especially in representing its GTAs, is about making sure that we represent the best interest of students, which is a long-term vision. You talked about big picture stuff. It's a long-term picture of, you know, these strikes have been going for years and years. I started in 2019. There were strikes when I arrived. That's nearly 5 years ago now. You know, we can't just expect this to go away. And ultimately, what impacts students more is this half-hearted decision-making that keeps happening. Does that make sense?
Specifically where staff are striking in protest over their pay and working conditions, do you support them taking that action if they're not satisfied with their pay?
I think everyone has a right to strike, absolutely.
Okay, and is there anything else which you'd like to say before the end of the interview?
Thank you so much for having me. And to all the students who are watching this in any format, thank you for engaging with the election. This is one of the most important elections that we take part in as students. And I think with the new officer structure, with the amount of competition there is this year, it's so exciting. And I think it's really important that you are able to vote for someone that you think will do the best job in representing you. And I really hope that I've explained a bit about why I think that's me. You can find more information. I have a link tree. It's linktree/reallygoodprez, or my Instagram is cerys.evans.16. You can find me all over the internet. And yeah, it's been an absolute privilege to be your president for 9 months now. And I hope that you'll have me for another year.
Thank you very much, Cerys.
Thank you.
I'm here with Matthew Lamb, who's a second-year computer science student from Pendle College. Now, Matthew, you're the comms officer for Pendle College, but all of your opponents who are running for president either have experience as the president of Lancaster University Students' Union or are current or former presidents of the JCRs. Do you think you've got enough experience to run for the role?
Well, yes, absolutely. So I'm not just the comms officer, I'm now the VP Media of Pendle College, so I got a nice little promotion, I guess. But also in the past, I've also been sort of a de facto president of a previous students' union, which is the Furness College Students' Union, and I often deputised the presidents there.
Furness College here, even though you're a student at Pendle?
No, I'm the Furness College Students' Union, which is a different students' union in a place called Barrow, about that way. Yes, so it's not Furness College here.
Okay, right. Now, you've put in your manifesto that you want to run on a campaign of anti-progressivism and promoting austerity and a war on drugs. These are a lot of provocative buzzwords. Is this just shock campaigning, shock politics, or is the real substance behind your points?
Well, not really. The point of my campaign is to stand up for people who feel as though they are not represented within the students' union. I want to stand up for people on this campus who feel as though they cannot say their true feelings, or they want to challenge the current narrative. I'm there to stand up for those people, and I think that it's important to get those messages across into the wider debate. You know, it's important to have a diverse students' union in terms of viewpoints.
And what true feelings and opinions are those?
Well, those are my true feelings. What I've put in my manifesto is what I truly believe in.
Precisely what sorts of thoughts and opinions have students got on campus that they feel like they can't express?
Well, it's not that they can't particularly express them, it's more that those viewpoints are not particularly in the establishment of the students' union, which myself alone, I cannot particularly bring it in, but at least I can say here's a group of students that do believe in this, and we should debate it more often.
But you've still not explained precisely what these sorts of opinions are, though.
Okay, so on drugs, the recent harm reduction policy that's been introduced, I've had many students come to me and say, we don't support this is dangerous, we needed to take a tougher stance on drugs.
I mean, look, it's always a matter of controversy if we should have a more pragmatic approach to drugs or a zero tolerance policy. But what proponents of a more pragmatic approach will say is that students are going to be taking drugs regardless. The best thing we can do is help them take drugs safely, educate them on how to take drugs safely, because if we just say, don't take drugs, they're bad, it won't stop anybody. In some ways, it isn't the safest thing to do to teach people how to be careful with drugs.
Absolutely, I do hear that point, and getting people away from drugs is more of a gradual process. It won't be done in a year, it will take a wider cultural shift, but my stance is that we have to work with the authorities, we have to work with as many people as possible to get drugs out of people's hands. And ultimately, it's not just the students, it's the dealers that we really have to go after if we really want to tackle drugs.
But you've specifically used the term war on drugs, which it dates back to America in the 70s, and there's been a lot of comments in the past 10 years or so, especially with the States in particular adopting a more pragmatic approach to drugs, in particular to cannabis, that the war on drugs has been a complete failure. Isn't this aggressive posturing? It's not a real policy to support students.
Well, it is real, because if you read Peter Hitchens' book, The War We've Never Fought, the war on drugs has not been fought. No one has tried to fight it. We've had 50 years of surrender to the drugs lobby, and really someone should stand up to that.
The drugs lobby, what of dealers walking into Parliament and persuading MPs to vote to legalise cocaine? What's the drugs lobby?
Well, there's a group of people who, of course, whether that be hippies or just students who want to legalise drugs. I do take the point that people want to legalise them, but I have the perspective that drugs are dangerous for society, and we should do everything we can to stop them.
But if that involves taking students to the police, how are students supposed to trust their students' union?
Yes, I mean, the reality is lots of students do not want drugs on campus. You know, that's what I truly believe in, that we have to get drugs off campus. I understand that some students may be affected by that, but the vast majority of students, when they go outside, they do not want to smell weed in the atmosphere. They want to breathe this fresh air.
Okay, sure, but polls show more than 50% of British adults in their lifetime will take an illegal substance. Isn't that suggesting the majority of students don't want to be sent to the police if they're found to be using drugs?
Well, that's suggesting that we have failed as a society, and we have to take immediate steps to bring back the control on drugs.
Right, and to move on to more financial points in your manifesto, you've said that the SU needs to adopt a policy of austerity immediately or face bankruptcy, but the SU reported a budgetary surplus at the end of last year. Why austerity?
Well, that's great to hear, but right now, I believe the previous figures were we were running a huge deficit, and that was dangerous. You know, I'm proud that we saw a surplus, but we really have to make sure we can maintain that. If we can maintain that, great, but if we do sort of step back into a deficit again, we really do have to take measures that will balance that budget.
But austerity in the midst of a cost of living crisis, wouldn't that mean cutting support for students with things like supper club, providing spaces for students which are warm, which have food? The most vital support, isn't that exactly what would be cut with a programme of austerity, just like it's been with the national government?
No, not necessarily, because recently we took away the two FTO positions so we can put that funding to balance the budget, and also the NUS. We send them 22 grand a year. If we left that, we could also save 22 grand
22 grand is 0.5% of the SU's annual budget, and being part of that, it brings Lancaster a seat at the table when it comes to national debates on students. The NUS has contact with the government, with national lobbying organisations. Isn't it better to be inside the tent than outside of it? You know, 0.5% of the students' union's budget seems comparatively a small price to pay.
Well, not particularly, because I feel as though students are not being represented at the NUS well enough. We saw the NUS elections, there was pretty low turnout for that, so I think the NUS is failing on that. You know, we send off delegates, and the NUS has a reputation of just having one viewpoint, which we really have to tackle. But the idea that
of just having one viewpoint?
Absolutely. I mean, the current consensus of the NUS is that they are more progressive, and the candidates we sent there are more progressive from what I've seen.
Progressivism's not a single viewpoint, and if we're sending progressive candidates to the NUS, isn't that because the majority of students on campus are progressive? I mean, in the local elections last year, in the university ward, only 12% of votes cast went to the Conservative Party. Wouldn't that suggest the overwhelming majority of students on Lancaster's campus support the progressive status quo, as you've put it?
Potentially, but then there's also a vast majority of silent students. For example, a lot of international students, they could not vote in the national elections for the local elections, So there is a amount of students, perhaps not the majority, but there is a serious amount of students on this campus who do not support progressive policies.
But Right, assuming that every single international student opposes these progressive policies, that's still a significant minority of students. Are you here to raise awareness, or do you actually think you stand a chance at winning the election?
Whether I stand a chance of winning the election, what I'm here is to stand up for what I believe in, what I believe many students believe in. If I win or not, then so be it. But what I truly do care about is standing up for students or views that are not particularly represented. That's why I'm here.
Sure, but standing against the progressive ideas which are found in British universities, it's these progressive ideas which have turned universities into some of the most inclusive places in the UK, where queer students, racial minorities, everyone feels in general more accepted than they do in wider society, regardless of failings at the university level in general. Students are better represented in university because of this progressive ideology, surely, so why oppose it?
Well, absolutely. I do agree. I do support the representation of those groups, but also you have to take into account other aspects where perhaps it has gone too far.
How?
Well, for example, last year I saw posters going up around the campus saying, oh, here are pronoun policies. I don't particularly agree that. I feel as though people might be pressured to put their pronouns on the SU things.
I mean, people don't have to put their pronouns anywhere. No one's being forced to declare that their pronouns if they don't want to. And indeed, you'll find that queer students are often in favour of not forcing people to put their pronouns in places, because students who are questioning their gender might be made uncomfortable by having to publicise a particular set of pronouns. But it's really not the case that people are being forced to express their pronouns. I fail to see the problem with progressivism in British universities.
Perhaps not forced, but I would say more pressured. For example, if lots of people around it are doing that. I was in a meeting once and everyone in the room started saying their pronouns, so I said mine because I felt as though I was pressured to just conform to that.
Well, are you uncomfortable expressing your pronouns?
Well, I don't see a need as why I should express them.
Why?
Because, do you think it's obvious what I am?
I think that if you express your pronouns, it can make a more comfortable environment for transgender students who might not appear what you first expect them to be.
I do take that, but I would feel rather uncomfortable if someone couldn't tell what I am right now. I feel slightly disrespected.
Can you tell what I am right now?
With respect, you're a man.
I'm not. I'm transgender. I'm a woman.
Well, I respect that, but let's not get sidelined into that. Issue.
It's not sidelining here. We're specifically discussing the point of bringing up pronouns in university settings. Aren't I a good example of why like introducing yourself with name and pronouns can make a more inclusive environment? I fail to see the problem with it.
I just think it's a bit of a natural way to introduce yourself, saying your name and then your pronouns. I think we should just stick with names. That's just my opinion, that we're flowing into a rather unnatural way of conversation, if you will.
What, and we need to campaign against it because it feels a bit unnatural to say?
Not necessarily. I would say just more of being pressured into it, like I was. I felt as though I had to conform to that, but I completely take your point. If you want to say that, my position is if you want to say them, say them. If you don't say them.
Okay.
So,
but
I do truly respect everyone.
I'd point out, though, as I say, you'll find in general queer students don't want everybody to feel pressured into saying their pronouns, because lots of people have got reasons why they might not be comfortable with that. I'm not
Absolutely.
sure I agree with your particular assessment that people are being en masse pressured into expressing their pronouns if they're uncomfortable with that.
Absolutely, and on your point of queer students saying that, I completely agree with them, and that is another effect, that if you are questioning what your gender is, then pronoun policies may perhaps be a detriment to that.
But if your campaign is focusing on campaigning against progressive cultural attitudes in the SU,
Yes.
Isn't there a chance that could make some students feel uncomfortable?
Yes, I do accept that it could make some students uncomfortable, but we have to be a broad church in the SU. For example, I won't be the only I may be an anti-progressive in the SU, but there will be, I'm sure, many progressives in the SU, so we can have a true diverse range of viewpoints.
I mean, a diverse range of viewpoints, yeah, but when people are talking about diversity in the SU, it means both in terms of viewpoints, but also in terms of representation. That's something which is exactly what progressives are pushing for, surely.
Oh yes, I do believe in a diverse range of viewpoints and people standing, but I believe people should be chosen on merit, and if you have good merits, then absolutely you'll be voted in.
Now, if we can talk more about a couple of policies in particular. As president, you've got a fairly broad role overseeing all of the SU, and the role will be encompassing working with JCRs and college presidents as well. How would you plan on going about that? Are you happy with the amount of input that colleges get with the students' union at the moment?
Well, in terms of colleges, I am a true believer in college autonomy. I think colleges should have more independence to allow them to do what they want. Last year, there was the sporting events, which I believe was rebranded into college rivals. We had a bit of an issue with the purchase of banners with the students' union. They said we had to buy them. You know, there was a big debate over that, which I think was truly terrible to the JCRs, and it sort of ruins the event almost. People felt demotivated and it was just conflict.
So you push for a policy of greater autonomy for JCRs from the students' union then?
Yes.
Okay. And if we can talk a little bit about strikes, you know, as president, you've got to oversee every aspect of the SU, and in recent years a big part of that has been students have been quite affected by strikes. Now, there aren't some at the moment. The pensions dispute has been resolved. The one over pay and working conditions, members were balloted at the start of this academic year, and although the vast majority voted in favour, the turnout was too low to continue striking. But there's a high likelihood that this strike comes back in the future because it's still unresolved. How would you go about supporting students when these strikes take place, if they do?
Absolutely. We are incredibly lucky that strikes have not particularly affected us this academic, but I was here last year and it was truly terrible, the amount of strikes happening. But as for the future, I think the students have to know that the SU is on their side. You know, in the past, the Students' Union has come out to support strikes, which is terrible when we are here to represent students.
Supporting strikes is terrible.
Well, yes, when you're here to represent students and the university lecturers are striking, then your job is to stand up for students who are missing out on their lectures and paying for a service they are not receiving.
What about all of the postgraduate students who are represented by LUSU who are also employed as graduate teaching assistants who went on strike, that they're represented at once by the UCU and LUSU? How can LUSU represent these students if it's opposing the strikes?
Well, I would say they have the UCU union. You know, my duty is to stand up for students who are stood in their studying capacity. That is what I believe in. And if students are paying for a service that they are missing out on, and the Students' Union is there saying, oh, we support these strikes, what message does that send to students? It sends a message that the SU is not on your side, that we are just allowing this to happen, and we really need to change that narrative and say, no, striking is bad from a student's perspective because we are missing out on a service and we are not being reimbursed for that. We are paying a lot of money to be here and we are not getting a service.
Striking affects students, yeah, of course, but if you speak to lecturers, they'll say that striking, you know, they don't want to be on strike, they want to be in lecture theatres, in seminar rooms, they want to be teaching, they want to be researching, they just want decent pay and working conditions. Wouldn't the best way to resolve this be for the SU to put pressure on British universities to give academic staff what they're asking for?
No, I would say the UCU is a well-established union. They are well within their capacity to argue for that. Ultimately, my job is to just stand up for students who are missing a service. I would like to put pressure on the university, maybe more on a reimbursement perspective, saying, oh, we have missed this lecture, can we have our money back there? That is what I believe the Students' Union could put pressure on, and that way we can resolve the strikes quicker because there is that other incentive to resolve the strikes.
I mean, you've got a perspective when it comes to the SU's financials, though, that they need to be incredibly austere. Can Lancaster University be affording to pay thousands of pounds back to students for missed lectures?
Well, yes, I believe there is a legal route you can go down. I'm not sure if it's been tried and tested, but there is a possibility that they have to give that money back because it has been missed. It's a service they're not receiving.
And could the university afford to do this, do you think?
I'm not sure if the university could afford that, but ultimately they will have to pay up because we've sent them our money and we haven't received a service.
Now, you've ended your manifesto with, I believe, a Spanish phrase, afuera, viva la libertad.
Yes.
Could you explain what you mean by that?
Well, yes, that is a quote from an Argentinian politician who's recently won an election there, and he's took on a really anti-bureaucratic stance, and that is the same stance I want to take on here. Afuera.
And his anti-bureaucratic stance, hasn't this crashed the Argentinian economy?
Well, no, the Argentinian economy was already in decline. And actually what we've seen is that the first budget surplus in 10 years in Argentina. So this plan it might be hard for a little while, but the plan is Argentina needs to be fixed. I don't really necessarily want to get into
but what is the link between this Argentinian slogan and student union politics in Lancaster?
Well, it was more of just a rallying cry, afuera, afuera, afuera. It was more to get up the spirit of people and say, oh, we will afuera, 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 out of the bureaucraticness, out of the NUS.
Out of everything. It's like a students' union Brexit, effectively.
Well, perhaps looks it. Who knows?
Is there anything else which you'd like to say before the end of the interview?
Well, it was an absolute pleasure talking with you, and I just want to be here to put forward my agenda and try and stand up for students who perhaps feel they're not represented, and I truly wish good luck to all the other candidates. I've worked with some of them in the past and they are truly lovely people, so I wish them good luck.
Thank you very much, Matthew. I'm here with Nathan Mooney, who's a third-year law student, former president of Lonsdale College, and is currently a student trustee. So, Nathan, why have you wanted to go for the big job of president?
I think that my previous experience, as you said, from president of Lonsdale and currently on the board of the trustee, I think it puts me in the best position to make the biggest change for students. And I think my passion for Lancaster and the student body kind of is why I want to stay and why I want to do the job.
You've talked about some of your key pledges and your areas of focus if you've elected, and one of them is focusing on accessibility and affordability, and you've talked specifically about wanting to push for more rent freezes. Now we've seen that rent's been frozen in some of the more affordable accommodation on campus from this year going into next year. Do you think that you can get the university to maintain that if you're elected, and would you be looking to expand that to more accommodation as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think the work that's been done so far has been great. I do think that more needs to be done. Like as you said, it's some of the accommodation that has had the rent freeze is already on the more accessible accommodation, but it's something like the rent increase since I started in Lancaster was gone up by like 31% overall for my accommodation, whereas student loans has only increased by 2.5%. So I think working with the university to be like, this isn't financially acceptable for students, like it is pricing people out of coming to university, is something that greatly needs to happen. And I think it kind of works well with the cost of living plans that the university that I would like to implement.
Well, to advocate from the perspective of the university for a second, they struggle with funding because the £9,250 which we've paid them, and that's been, well, it was set at 9,000 2010, 2011, raised up by 250 in 2016 or so. That's now worth, in real terms, only about 2/3 of what it was, and universities have been complaining they're struggling with funding, they're struggling to make ends meet. And of course, with so much accommodation on campus, the cost of rent is a big way that the university can bring in cash. How do you think in meetings you could persuade the university that really the right thing to do is to keep rent frozen for students?
I think it's kind of that hard line because it's obviously accommodation is one of the biggest sources of income for the university. But year on year, we are seeing a decrease in admissions. It's like county this year has got empty townhouses. So it's coming from that aspect of we're increasing the rent to make more money, but we're not getting the same amount of students in. But if we could freeze that rent, we might see an increase of students coming back to university because it would be more affordable, or, well, not, I don't think affordable is the right word because the price is so high.
But not as expensive.
Yeah, not as expensive is probably the best way to phrase it.
To jump quickly onto another issue of yours, you've talked about wanting a welfare-focused strategy on tackling drugs and on sexual well-being. Could you explain a little bit more about that and what you've got in mind specifically?
Yeah, so it kind of, my current, I think it's something that definitely needs a lot more work and consultation on, but my idea behind it is when we start university, we have those ready to come to Lancaster types of induction modules, but there's not much around drug use or sexual health, and the last time we have any formal education regarding sexual health and drugs is early in our high school education, if that even happens at all. We don't know what people are coming in, and I think it's one of those where drug use is a reality of some students' lives, and it's rather to reduce the harm than the punishment behind it, just to keep more students safe. I think that's where my idea is behind it.
Now, a criticism which you frequently get of these sorts of harm reduction policies is that it can encourage people to take drugs, and specifically where you're talking about harder drugs, especially those which come in powdered or tablet forms, where it's really easy for them to be cut with particularly nasty stuff, is a focus on a pragmatic approach of, well, students will take drugs, we can't stop it, we should just try and help them. Is that a better approach to drug use than pushing flat out for zero tolerance to drug use?
Yeah, I think it's a hard line because it's one of those where if we kind of reduce the idea of the punishment behind it, then maybe students will see it as more of an acceptable thing, where coming with this harm reduction approach, I've just discussed it with pub and people have similarly criticised it like that, but it's more of if we do implement policies like this, we are kind of trying to reduce the harm, or if we come with the zero tolerance approach, it could still be happening and we've kind of taken a step back, whereas with the policy like this, we are at least attempting to put something in place that could prevent more serious things occurring.
You've talked as well about wanting to have a robust plan in place to prepare the union for future strikes. Now, there aren't strikes at the moment. The dispute over pensions was resolved, the one over pay and working conditions. UCU members were balloted back at the start of this academic year, and although the vast majority voted in favour of continuing to strike, the turnout was just a couple of percent too low, so the strikes have been suspended for the time being, but there's the potential they come back in future. What sort of plans would you want to put in place to help students during strikes?
I think I completely support the UCU strikes, and I think that is something that strikes will happen again. It is kind of an eventuality. I don't know what form the policy would take. It is something that would need a lot of consultation from lecturers and teaching staff themselves and the university officials. But the idea that we could be in a similar position, say, this year or this time next year, where there's the final year students have that issue around progression and we've not got anything in place, and we kind of can see that it's coming, and having no policies there ready feels like a failure for students. I'm not 100% sure of what that policy would look like, but I do think there is a great need for something like that in place.
Yeah, and I think in the previous academic year there'd been a kind of expectation when the strikes were taking place that a marking and assessment boycott, well, because it's not a full strike, it won't be as impactful, it won't be quite as severe. But as you say, in particular, final year students really felt the hit on that, because they weren't potentially able to graduate until they'd got their work marked. But there's also the problem of quite a lot of the marking in the university is done by graduate teaching assistants who are represented simultaneously by the UCU because they're academic staff, but also by LUSU because they're students at the university as well. How do you balance representing students' needs there with the fact that they've got aligned interests with lecturers as well?
I think it's hard because I know from speaking in previous years to the postgraduate teaching staff is that they often didn't feel like they were in a position where they could strike because it is so financially impactful. And I think having those people in the room when we are making these types of policy is kind of key to making it effective and actually form for function. Yeah.
You've talked as well about wanting to reduce transportation costs. That's to jump back to your set of policies on making student life more affordable. Now, Stagecoach and the university and LUSU have been engaged in negotiations for years. There's been a lot of back and forth. Very little progress has been made. So why do you think you have what it takes to really push through negotiations and get a good deal for students?
I think it's because it has been so ongoing, these discussions with Stagecoach, it's hard that I think that previous years it's kind of been more of a continuation, but I think it needs to be a fresh start. It doesn't need to be this constantly building upon what a predecessor has done in certain regards, certain matters. It's great to continue the work, but I think coming in with a new approach and being like, this as a baseline isn't good enough, like this service isn't meeting the needs of students, the price isn't good enough. We're in the cost of living crisis and we've had no reduction in any of the transport costs. And just coming in with that stronger approach, I think really will show that students care about this matter and it's just not being met. I
mean, in the hustings last year, the at the time President Indy Ellis said that one of the big obstacles to breakthroughs in negotiations was that the FTO team changes really frequently. And in that sense, when we've got the incumbent candidate Cerys in the race, wouldn't the best thing for negotiations, if that's the case, be to sort of stick with who we've got, especially because it takes quite a while to fit into the role, to get used to those kinds of meetings and negotiations. It's very different to the sort of work you've got as a student. In some ways, wouldn't the best approach be to just stick with what we got right now?
Yeah, I think there's always that been, and I've been interested in student politics since I started, so I've attended each hustings every year, and there always has been that element of it's being a current FTO does add that element of experience, like it provides that element of, I don't know, stability, but I sit on the board of the trustee, I sit alongside the FTOs, I'm already in those meetings. I do feel like I also have that knowledge, like I'm in the office a lot, I'm working with the head of commercial, I have that element of know-how as well, and I think that kind of will work alongside in those discussions.
On top of that, a potential sort of problem point is that the cost of living crisis obviously affects students, and as a sort of a rule of thumb, the less you had to begin with, the harder the cost of living crisis has hit you. But it's hit companies as well, and for Stagecoach, a transportation company, one of their biggest expenses will be the cost of fuel. And compared to the historically low prices in the pandemic, fuel prices are incredibly high now. So they'd probably argue they've had to raise the price of bus tickets in order to continue to turn a profit. How could you persuade them that it's in their best interest to lower prices?
I think it'd be hard because they have such a monopoly on Lancaster, because in many other cities and towns you don't only have a sole transport provider. I think if they do, it's hard to negotiate. If they do come across with that point of we have to increase ours as well, then if you're increasing the cost, you should also increase the service. If we're paying the same amount for a set service, they should be more frequent. There's other routes that we can come back at and say this is what the students are paying. If you can't come back to us with this. This is another alternative.
I mean, you can make these kinds of normative and moralistic arguments about what Stagecoach should be doing, but at the end of the day, they're a company, their goal is to turn a profit, and if they were so vulnerable and prepared to listen to arguments of emotion, and it's so hard for students, they probably wouldn't be in business for a very long time, because the best thing they could do is offer buses completely for free, but they go bankrupt immediately. Like at the end of the day, their goal is to turn a profit. How can you persuade them that it's more profitable for them to reduce prices for students?
I think it'd be quite hard to negotiate that, because they are the only. If we had another company in Lancaster, for example, that would add this element of competition, which would be great, because then you could see the difference in services and different in costs, which is something that we don't know. We could look into, see if there is other providers that would be willing to start running services in Lancaster to add that element of competition in price, which I think would be a route that is good to look down.
Okay, and excuse me, have you considered the possibility of approaching the university or the SU to maybe subsidise the cost of bus passes in part to make it more affordable for students? Is that an avenue for reducing effects on students which you think could be worthwhile?
I think it's a good idea, but having been in meetings, I don't feel like that is something that it's like, say for example, I'm already arguing for, say, a rent freeze or working for maintenance loans, and then at the same time asking for more money for this. I think it's hard to be asking the university for all this money and then more so again, if that makes sense. I think it could be the end point that we get to, being stage which have come back and gone, no more, this is our end point, and then say that's what happens, and then we go to the university. I don't think it'd be my initial point of call, but I definitely think it could be a route to be explored.
I mean, you've got quite a broad manifesto in general, and couldn't that really be an argument that there, as well as president, your time's split incredibly thin? You've got a lot of responsibilities, a lot of things on your plate. Wouldn't it be more realistic to pick, one or two focuses for the year and really push to get those one or two things done, instead of having quite a broad set of policy ideas and manifesto pledges that you might not be able to achieve just because you've not got the time to focus on all of them?
I appreciate that my manifesto is quite broad. However, I think I took a lot of consultation from people I know, different student groups, when building my manifesto, because I think a lot of them they are widespread but also very interconnected with each other. So like in my first section, which is about making things cheaper and more accessible, the rent freeze and the increasing maintenance loan, however they seem very separate, kind of balance each other out. So I think there's that need of working on one thing kind of naturally flows into the next, or kind of benefits the next matter, which is was my thought process throughout the manifesto.
You've talked as well about wanting to sort of improve the way that JCRs and LCOs operate. Could you talk a bit more about precisely what you have in mind there?
So I've spent many years on the Lonsdale JCR. I've held various positions, and I've worked closely with current and former LCOs, and I think they are such a vital part of Lancaster. JCRs are often your first introduction to university, and LCOs have such an important role within their liberation forums. I believe because their role is so crucial, I think they need just a looking at. There's not been a big JCR LCO review for a long time, and I think they've been overlooked in how they are currently, like how they are formed, what their oversight is, and what actual responsibilities we as a students' union push on them, where we forget that they are still students, they still have a degree to do. However, the job they do is so crucial. So I think it'd be more uniformity within the JCRs throughout all the colleges, and looking at the LCOs and going, what support do you need? Is your makeup of your group actually working for you? Is it working for the community you serve? So you're kind of working with the groups themselves to be like, okay, what can we do for you? Is this currently working? Has it been the same for how many years? What can we do to make it better?
Now, as well, there's been a push in the past year to really encourage people to run for roles in the Students' Union, because in last year's main elections there were 6 FTO roles and a total of 8 candidates, and it's been much improved this year, 4 roles, 17 candidates, but it's been successful for FTOs, not so much for LCOs. LCOs? Because once again, there have been several roles which have had no one put themselves forward at all. The nominations have been extended. Why do you think people aren't running for those roles, and how can the union fix this?
I think it is such a shame that these roles aren't being ran for at all and not even contested, because I think the greater the contesting is, the better the candidates. I think it is visibility within the role itself. I don't think many people outside of the, as we call it, the LUSU sphere, know what the roles do, what like the benefits of the role, how much you learn as a person doing these roles. I don't think that we kind of shine a light, especially on the LCOs. I don't think they get their limelight enough that they should. I think the work that they do is so good, and I don't think we, as a union, shout about it enough. So I think that's probably one of the main reasons.
I mean, part of the problem as well, surely, is the fact that the role's completely unpaid. It's a lot of time, it's a lot of energy, it can be incredibly stressful, I'm sure, and you're putting a lot of weight on your shoulders, making yourself responsible for representing an entire demographic of students at the university, which could be hundreds or even thousands large, and they get no pay whatsoever. Do you think the LCO roles ultimately should be paid?
I think I've discussed it with current LCOs as well, like around the pay issue, because I think a lot of us do agree that we spend so much time in these positions. A lot spend more time on the position than they do on their degree. It's hard as a union to be like, okay, we think these positions be paid, because there is so many vital positions. Like if an LCO officer would think that they should pay them, and then a JCR president would then be like, oh, okay, I do work as well. Why can't it's a hard. I think there's other avenues where we can reward student leaders, not necessarily hourly pay, for example. I think there's other things we can be putting in place that makes the role like they want to do it more.
But these are students who are taking on a degree, and you've said that some of them are spending more time as an LCO than they are as a student, effectively. At the end of the day, wouldn't people be much more incentivised to take that on like a part-time job? In the officer review, we've got rid of 2 FTO roles. That is 80 hours a week combined of working hours which have been saved. You could split that across the 6 LCOs, pay them 13 hours a week for their work. Wouldn't that be a fairer system which would encourage people to run?
I think it would encourage people to run, and I think it is a great idea. However, I don't think it is just LCOs who are prioritising the work they do over the degree. I think it can be very widespread to a lot of society execs, a lot of college execs, and I think that's an issue that we as a union have of imposing so much responsibility onto these student leaders, where we're expecting them to do so much work, and they end up prioritising, as I said, the role over their degree. I don't think that pay should be a reason that people would run for an LCO role. I think it's not a bad reason to run, but I don't think it is the be-all and end-all. I think there should be other reasons for it.
I mean, yeah, you wouldn't want people to run for a role like that just because it's a part-time job. But at the end of the day, it's a very challenging role, and people might want to be able to do that, but they can't, because they can't afford to take on 10 or 15 hours a week of work if it'll be completely unpaid, especially because LGBTQ students are more likely to be estranged from their families. Disabled students are more likely to face discrimination in jobs. These are already some groups of people who might be struggling more than the average student with the cost of living crisis. Wouldn't you get more people who find themselves able to run in the first place if you could compensate them at least some amount for the work they put in?
Yeah, I think it's a hard decision to make. I think if we could pay every student leader who is putting so much work in that the student community benefits from, I would love to.
But this idea that we can't pay everyone, therefore we shouldn't pay anyone, that doesn't really seem fair.
I think it's more of the approach that I see, that the LCOs do such vital work, but I think it is we don't need to pay. I think there's other avenues for them to be rewarded for their jobs. I think if we could pay them, if we wanted to pay them, that'd be a great decision. But I don't think it is an immediate choice that we could make. I think it would take so much consultation to decide that this is where the money we're spending is going to.
But right now you've got groups of minority students who, unless we get some people who run with the extended nominations, there'll be some groups of minority students who just aren't represented at all because no one is interested in running or no one is able to run. Wouldn't that be the easiest, most direct way to address this problem? I'm not sure. I think the idea that if we just, I think there's other avenues. I don't believe that just adding a pay to the position will dramatically increase the turnout. I think that, and also the matter of groups being not represented, I think there's other avenues that groups are represented. So we look at Union Assembly, for example, you have your faculty reps, you have your college presidents, you have your societies. So everyone is often a part of multiple groups. So I think that there's always someone there to represent you. Even if you don't know directly, you're a part of many groups at the university. You might not be aware, but you are always being represented by someone. So that's how I think you'd combat that. Is there anything else you'd like to mention before the end of the interview?
I think that I'd be a great fit for the role. My experience, I think, would really benefit the union, and I think my passion for the student experience is great. So yeah, I think I vote Nathan number 1 for Lancaster Students' Union President.
Thank you very much, Nathan. I'm here with Owen Coppack, who is a third-year History and Politics student and the former president of Furness College. So firstly, you've got experience as president, and part of the president's role will be working with JCRs and the colleges. Can you talk a little bit more about what your plans are for working with them?
Yeah, I mean, my experience, I was president of Furness for a year. We had a great year together. So I won President of the Year in 2023, and we actually won JCR Exec of the Year 2023 as well. I mean, I've got a few policies related to the colleges, so I want to establish a better working relationship with the execs in the finance department because I found that extremely problematic during my time as president. I mean, JCRs, if any of them are listening right now, they'd know that they rely on fast responses and purchase orders often last minute, which is just the nature of JCR operations, essentially. I also want to give more support to the planning of Welcome Week because I personally felt a bit isolated during the whole planning. I mean, it's a huge thing. You know, you're welcoming 500 new freshers to Lancaster. I mean, we did it in the end just through teamwork, essentially, at the JCR. But I'd like to lead a LUSU that was more integral to, you know, supporting the JCR execs because, after all, we are voluntary, and what we do is, you know, it's an essential bit of LUSU event planning. And yeah, I also want to organise meetings with the Sugar House, College Bar Management and LUSU events because I think at times we're missing key opportunities of where we can, you know, work on the college engagement because, you know, after all, the JCRs are in touch with the people in that college. They know what people want. And I just think, you know, there's lots of avenues and events we could do that are really fun, popular, and support students very well.
And have you got any specific ideas in mind for events or engagement?
Not specifically yet, but you know, if elected, I'd have them meetings early on. I'd make sure to involve JCR presidents, as I will be chairing. Now that the role's changed, I'll be chairing the PresCom. So, you know, presidents are the most in touch people with what the JCRs need, in touch with the student voice. And yeah, I bring people together, bring college management together, bring college bar staff together, Sugar House, because, well, specifically with the Sugar House actually, I think we're missing a key opportunity because as president of Furness, I found it much easier to work with Vibe than the Sugar House, and I think that should start to change really. I think, after all, the Sugar House is a student nightclub, and it seemed at times that Vibe were providing more opportunities to me personally for like free entry to events, and that helped boost attendance and stuff. So I think Sugar House, if we bring them together, tell them what we need, I think we can bring them on board.
And you talked as well about cost of living crisis support. You've talked
Yes.
about wanting to restore funding from the university for Where's the Food,
Yes.
Continuing the supper club and trying to push
Yeah.
for more rent freezes in accommodation. Have you got anything else specific in mind there?
Well, I mean, in terms of accommodation, if we look at it, I mean, my first year in Furness standard accommodation, I was paying £110 per week. Since then, that has gone up by £30. I mean, ensuite accommodation on a whole across the university is about £7,644 next year. And the average, according to Confused.com, the average maintenance loan is £5,820. Now, there's a huge disparity between people not being able to afford that accommodation, and we've seen it this year because there's empty townhouses, specifically in county. There's a few in Grisdale that I know of, and it's just simply because people cannot afford that. And why is it acceptable that maintenance loans don't go up but accommodation does? It's always the students suffering, and I want to fight for the students.
I mean, in fairness to the university, their
Yeah.
ensuite options and the townhouses
Yeah.
are the more expensive
They
ones.
are,
They've got
yeah.
cheaper, more basic accommodation.
That's true.
And with affordable accommodation, a lot
Yeah.
of prices are being frozen, so rent won't increase next year.
Yeah.
Are you satisfied with just that progress?
I mean, I praise the rent freeze, I obviously support it, but I think it should go further. I mean, I don't think it's sustainable that the current model that, the prices of rent the way it is. I mean, you mentioned the cheapest accommodation. I mean, standard, it's still about 5,500 a year to pay for standard accommodation and the maintenance loan. That leaves you with about £320 on average to live off. Now, it's not doable. And students are forced to get a job on top of their studies, which is disproportionately affecting what grades they get. Simple as that. People can't afford to eat. People are going hungry. Like Cerys said the other day at Question Time, I think I absolutely support that. And I just think, we can go further than that. And I think the university we should be, as an SU, demanding better of the university. We should be demanding lower rents. We should be demanding more food events. We should be demanding more support, because at the end of the day, the current government that we have at the moment are not increasing maintenance loans, and it's always constant pressure in terms of finances on students, and it's just everything's passed on to the student, and that's not fair.
I mean, from the perspective of the university, though, they probably argue these are costs which have to be passed on to students, because the amount of funding which the governments give to universities hasn't increased. The £9,250 a year which we pay is worth about 2/3 of what it was when it was introduced, which is £9,000 back in 2010, 2011. Lots of universities say that they now make an annual loss with every domestic student they take on. So they would argue that for as long as the current funding model continues, the only way they can continue to fund being a university is by increasing accommodation prices. How do you plan to work with the university to try and resolve this problem of the students haven't got the cash, the SU hasn't got the cash, and the university hasn't got the cash?
I'd like to talk to students. I'd like to get their opinion on things. I'd like to, present to Andy Schofield, the Vice-Chancellor, these are the hardship that that the students I represent are facing right now. And I'd like to point out to him that he's also losing a lot of money by having empty townhouses because people can't afford to live there.
So a reduction in prices on, say, the townhouses could perhaps be a practical way of creating more cash if townhouses are being left empty at the moment.
And what I'd say, I think from my time as president, I didn't get any specific clear answers on this, but from what I understand, the accommodation is not, they've basically signed agreements with private companies to manage the accommodation. Now, I think we need to look at them, because that's not sustainable. If the private company are constantly upping the prices year on year, it's going to put constant more pressure on students. And the current government are not increasing loans, and not increasing maintenance loans, So how is it sustainable in the long term for students to afford university if these rent prices, because as a first year, if you don't live at home, you ultimately have to live on campus, and people can't afford to do it.
Now, to turn our focus to the election itself,
Yes.
You've talked in your manifesto about wanting to improve low voter turnout. That's a problem
Yes.
which has plagued SU elections
Yeah.
for a number of years.
Absolutely.
Now, the number of candidates who apply, well, in terms of FTO roles,
Yeah.
it's increased significantly.
Yeah.
There was a big push in the SU this year. It's gone from last year we had 6 FTO roles, 8
Yeah.
candidates. This year there were 4 roles, 17 candidates.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
But in terms of pushing specifically voter turnout, what would you be proposing?
I mean, in terms of JCR elections, I mean, Furness were quite original in the sense that we brought back from COVID that it used to be traditionally a boring hustings that no one wanted to attend. And we made it big, we made it fun, we did little challenges with candidates. I'd like to push other colleges to do that because, I mean, it's no surprise that Furness had the highest voter turnout across the whole of the university in terms of the JCR elections, and that is because the work we did. I think that worked. I think we can do it again. I also think, you know, you just need to engage with students because no one's going to vote in an election if they don't feel represented. You've got to talk to students, make them feel welcome, and this starts with changing the culture of LUSU. I mean, when I first came to university here, I was told that, you know, the student union was so bad, lots of negative stories. I'm from my JCR, I experienced some of them, and I want to lead a student union that actually represents, looks at students, gets their voice on things, and yeah, I think they'll vote if you do that.
Now, a particular problem with turnout, which there has been, is even though the number of people who are going for FTO roles has increased, the number of people who go for LCO roles has not. And just like last year, there have been several roles which have had no candidates at all, and nominations have been extended. Why, ultimately, do you think people aren't interested in running for these positions?
Okay. I mean, I'm not the most knowledgeable about LCOs. I don't fully know the workload involved in it. I don't know how much work goes into it. But I mean, we need to probably look at, is it a role you can do alongside your studies because it's not paid? Can you is that like attractive to them? Can we look at, you know, maybe doing some courses with people who have been LCOs of how they can use that experience that they've got to further their CV, further their, you know, career prospects essentially, because people are doing it. I suppose it's an opportunity, because it is a good opportunity to lead LUSU essentially. But, you know, is there that support in place? Do the LCOs feel enough support? I mean, that's questions we've got to ask, I think.
So would you potentially support turning the LCO roles into paid positions into part-time officers like they used to be?
I don't personally support that. No, I don't think that would work because, I mean, then you're opening the door of questions like, should JCR presidents be paid?
But if the argument is that we can't afford to pay everyone, so we should pay no one, that still doesn't seem entirely fair because people take on the role of JCR president, but there's a problem with no one taking on the role of LCO.
Yeah, I don't personally support them being paid, but I think, you know, why can't we look at doing something with, I don't know, Central or something where they get like a loyalty scheme? Why can't we do something with a sugar house where they get some sort of rewards like drink vouchers every week or something like that? You've got to give an incentive to someone to do it because at the end of the day it is a voluntary position. It
just seems like if you want to create an incentive, a material incentive, surely the best way is having it not be a voluntary position at the end of the day. It would be a big expense, yes, but when no one at all is turning out to run for these roles, what other options have you really got at your disposal?
I mean, yeah, I'm open to the conversation, but I don't personally sit here and support it openly. I mean, if elected, I'd be happy to have that conversation with people like yourself and others. You've
talked about wanting to boost the student experience too.
Yes.
Could you explain a little bit more about what you have in mind there?
Yeah, I mean, I just thought about, I think we can utilise the Instagram much more, the LUSU Instagram. I mean, we need to do story takeovers. I think talking to people at events is a huge thing. I know, I've noticed occasionally that at the big events that the events crew run, there's often FTOs with like a whiteboard getting students' opinion. I think that's excellent. I think we should continue that 100%. I really like the idea during the Christmas markets of write your Vice-Chancellor a message. Really supported that. I'd like to do more like just generally talking to people, talk to what they're interested in, talk to how they're struggling. I also propose doing a weekly 2-hour president office hour, because I mean, during my time on the JCR, there was countless times where I needed to talk to one of the FTOs and there was no one in. And I think, you know, having that time set aside for anyone to come in, JCRs, anyone, stories about, you know, how people are struggling, how I can advise them to get help. I'd like to do stuff like that and just make it more student focused, more focused on people, and just talking to people all the time. Everything we do, we need to talk to people.
As president, you've got
Yes.
kind of a fairly overall responsibility. You're looking a bit more at the big picture.
Yeah.
And a big thing which has impacted the student experience in past years has been strikes. Now, there have not been
Yes.
strikes in this academic year at Lancaster because the pensions dispute's been resolved.
Yeah.
The one over pay and working conditions, the strikes have been suspended. The reballoted members started this academic year.
Yeah.
The majority supported continuing the strikes, but the turnout was too low to do so. So what this means is it seems likely that the strikes over pay and working conditions will probably continue in the near future. If you were elected and strikes were to happen in your term, how would you address them?
Firstly, I'd like to say I have solidarity with the strikers. I think what they're doing is quite admirable, because you've got to remember at the time they're not getting paid while they're striking as well. And these are really hard-working people that deserve to be paid properly, deserve to be treated properly. I mean, in terms of support, I'd like to talk to obviously the education officer about this, what ways we can sort of support them. I mean, LUSU Advice is one agency that is really, really good. Like, I'm an avid supporter of LUSU Advice. I think they're excellent. Their advisors, they have really nice, kind people. Like to maybe push that a bit more, how people can get avenues to support. Just make them feel like they're not alone in it, because it is, after all, if a strike happens, it is the whole student body that suffers. And I think, you know, these are dragged on for too long, and it's, you know, it's time for the university to really step up and stop them, because they do have the power to stop them. They're just choosing not to.
Now, for the students' union dealing with strikes, it can be a bit like threading a needle, because you've got to be representing students'
Absolutely,
interests.
Yeah.
But you want to have a degree of mutual solidarity between the two unions, and as well you've also got postgraduate students, and some of them are employed as graduate teaching assistants, which means that they are at once students and also academic staff and are represented by both. Are you pleased with how the SU has handled and responded to strikes up until this point, especially with regards to the marking and assessment boycott over the summer?
Yeah, I think, I believe I'm right in saying that the no detriment policy was pushed by the education officer at the time, and I do support that. I mean, like you say, it's a massive tightrope, really, because, you know, you want to support the staff, because I think they are admirable in what they're doing. They're, you know, setting aside pay that they could have to get better conditions. And there's also students that have suffered from the marking boycott, there's no doubt about it. I mean, there was, you know, stories across the country, not even here, just like delayed graduations. That doesn't seem fair, and it's constantly the students being punished. But I won't say that it's the staff's fault for striking that the students are being punished. It's the university management that are not willing to accept their demands and compromise, and that's fundamentally it.
Now, one issue which the kind of is here, because you're in a race against an incumbent candidate, and you're pleased to a certain extent with what the SU has done in the past, and obviously without wanting to turn it into a sort of a direct attack or a battle, why have you decided to run if you're pleased for the most part with what's happened?
Well, I would like to say I'm not pleased for the most part. I mean, during my 2 years at Lancaster, I mean, it's only started to improve recently. As a college cohort of presidents, after Welcome Week, it hit a bit of a head-to-head, really, because we felt unrepresented, we felt unrespected, we felt like our role we did was taken for granted. I think since, obviously, you've got the communities assistant now working with the JCRs closely, Gemma. I love Gemma, she's absolutely lovely. Gemma's helped a lot. I think Cerys has been largely a good president, to be honest. I think she's listened to students. I think she's took on their feedback on board. I mean, I've felt more respected as well. Last term, as my last term as president, I felt like we were really getting somewhere with a change. But I think there's still more work to do. I think, you know, JCRs, they're pivotal to the student experience, in my opinion. Like, without them, you wouldn't have Welcome Week. So I just think we can support them more, give them more incentive to do it, You know, whether that be, I know they've just recently given JCRs vouchers to go to the LUSU shop, which I think is good. I think that should continue. I'd like to look at more ways to reward them because they're pivotal, yeah.
So in general, the focus of your campaign would be on increasing communication, cooperation between JCRs and the SU then?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of opportunities there that have not been taken for granted over the last few years. I mean, I was on the JCR when the Patriots debacle happened, and, you know, it's no surprise that Furness and Cartmel are the only colleges with the College Cups in Term 2 because we wanted them there. And, you know, we felt like at times LUSU was out of touch with what the college wanted. I mean, we had to change the bylaws to prevent them from changing the date of our event. And I just think that was unacceptable. I think the LUSU staff need to understand fully what the JCRs do, because I think some people don't have knowledge. It might not be their fault, I'm not saying it is. But, you know, I'd like to implement maybe some like weekly training sessions of what JCRs do within the LUSU staff and make them more student focused, make them open, make them, you know, respect the role that we do more.
So would this be strictly a push for greater understanding, or would you want greater autonomy as well?
Great understanding. I think the JCRs largely do have a lot of autonomy already, I'd say. I mean, there's obviously budgetary constraints that they have to budget around, but you know, largely, apart from PresCom, which is where you can raise stuff, JCRs run themselves, you know, with the support of LUSU, with the support of Union Development, which is now dissolved into the presidency. So yeah, let's say that.
Is there anything else you'd like to talk about before the end of the interview?
I think we're good.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you very much, Owen. I'm joined by Shlok, who's a third-year business management student and is currently the president of Grisdale College. So firstly, why have you decided to run for president?
So I've been on my college JCR since my first year. Joined in as a socials and events officer, then went up to VP, and eventually in my third year I'm now president. Since I've become president is when I've been thinking about running for an FTO position, because as president you're involved with the SU a lot. You get to talk with the people that are actually in the positions right now, and I see what they do and how much they do, and I feel like it's a job that I would be really good at because I'm really passionate about getting students what they want.
Okay, and to jump straight into your manifesto, you talked firstly about wanting to reduce prices of essential items for students.
Yeah.
Now, the SU owns LUSU shop on the South Spine, but most of the other shops on campus are owned either by the university or by private businesses. How do you plan to persuade them to reduce their prices?
As president, I know that I can have meetings with the university and policy setters and places like the marketplace or even the deli, which are university owned, are supposed to be catering to students and what students' needs are. And I feel like over the past few years, the prices have gotten a lot higher than they were before. And I feel like having meetings with the right people, you can reduce the prices of these places so people can get food on campus.
Well, the prices have increased, but in fairness to those places, there is a cost of living crisis. The minimum wage has risen, rent has risen, the university's got more expenses than it ever has. Do you really think they can afford to be cutting back on the prices for students?
I feel like the thing that they should focus on is cutting prices for students, because the maintenance loan for students has not increased. They still have the same amount of money that they have to work with increased rent prices, increased prices for food and everything. And I feel like as the university's main customer base is students, that's who they should be catering to.
But is that not really a problem for the government if the maintenance loan hasn't been increasing? Yeah, the cost of living crisis is hitting students especially hard because we're on a fairly static income unless we work a part-time job as well. But at the end of the day, the businesses on campus are businesses that they've got to be able to turn a profit. How are they supposed to do that if they have to cut their prices?
The university, I'm sure, will have enough funds to fund students. Otherwise, students will just stop coming to the university. They need to have affordable food on campus when they're coming in, especially the off-campus students. If you can't afford to eat here, why would you come here?
Well, if they can't afford to eat here, what university could they afford to eat at? Lancaster's one of the most affordable places in England to live, especially compared to cities like, well, even in the north, cities like Manchester or Liverpool. It's better in particular than Bristol, London, lots of places in the south.
Manchester, Liverpool are cities where things are generally more expensive, and over the past few years the prices are getting comparable to that of Manchester and Liverpool, and I feel like as a university and as the Students' Union we should be supporting the students in any way that we can.
But if your argument is that the university is incentivised to cut prices because students would choose to go to other universities instead, how's that the case if most universities in cities are already more expensive than Lancaster?
I feel like even though these cities are more expensive and the university is not as expensive, I feel like they still can do a better job in making things more affordable on campus.
Now, you've talked as well about wanting to negotiate with Stagecoach to get a better deal for students. Could you elaborate on exactly what that means?
So, in my first year, a day rider for Stagecoach was around £2.20.
That, I'm assuming, would be the under-19...
Under-19 day rider, yeah. Which is now at around £3.40, if I'm not wrong. Stagecoach does have some form of a partnership with the university. The university's logo is on buses, and it runs its services from campus to town and back and forth. Since most students second and third year do live in town, getting to campus is really expensive for someone that doesn't have a car, and even so with a car. But travel to university is essential. People need to attend lectures, and I'm sure meetings with people that currently run Stagecoach could help in finding a right price for like a student day rider or a student bus pass, which has also increased about £40 since last year.
Well, the Students' Union actually has been engaged in talks with Stagecoach for several years at this point. At a discussion last year, the president at the time, India Ellis, said that a big part of the problem was that because there's such a frequent changeover with FTOs, it's difficult to engage in consistent discussions with Stagecoach. They can effectively stall indefinitely because it takes 6 or more months for an FTO to build up strong negotiation skills, by which point they're nearly out of the job already. So the reason why negotiations have gone basically nowhere is because FTOs keep changing, and with Cerys, the incumbent president, being in the race, wouldn't the best negotiation tactic to be stick with her, not change horses midstream?
I'm sure speaking with Cerys, should I win, speaking with Cerys post-election when she's still in the role, and speaking to her about how I can take her current fight forward would be a good way to keep it going.
But there are some skills which you can surely only learn on the job, and having a person who's already been in the job a year would be an advantage in negotiations, surely.
Having a new person with a new set of ideas would also be a good advantage for someone to have.
Then why has there been absolutely no progress in negotiations between LUSU and Stagecoach in however long these discussions have been going on for? The price of tickets has been a sore spot for students for years and years, but no progress gets made. I
feel like as you said, FTOs change, and I feel like handover between the FTOs may not have been as good as it should be. And I feel like, should I win, I want to take this handover from Cerys and move it forward without stalling the progress that she's already made.
So a strong handover on its own, you think, would be the best way to continue negotiations?
A strong handover would be one good way to continue negotiations, yeah.
And what precisely would your goals be in negotiating with Stagecoach?
I feel like the main goals that I would have in negotiating with Stagecoach is to have a reduced student day rider, get it down to at least around £3, because a £1.20 increase over 2 years is a big amount. Also with student bus passes, having a subsidised rate, even further subsidised than the one that currently is in existence, would be good as well.
I mean, again though, Stagecoach is a commercial enterprise. They seek to make a profit, and really the students, we've got no choice. We have to get to campus if we don't own a car, unless we fancy a walk or cycling there. They're our only choice. They've not got a lot of incentive to lower prices. The buses are already packed with students. How would you be able to persuade them to lower their prices?
I feel like at the end of the day, you have to think about the fact that I know that there are a lot of students that wouldn't go to lectures just because they don't want to pay for the bus pass or go into campus less because they don't want to pay that expensive price that currently is there for a ticket.
But do you think that that could actually persuade Stagecoach it would be more profitable to lower the prices of their tickets?
Yeah, I feel like if the ticket price does get lowered, there would be more students that would be going in, which means more money coming in.
Yes, but it's also less per ticket. If you decrease prices by, say, or you're talking by £1, that's about a third, over a third of the ticket price.
I never said I was going to wanted to fight for it to get reduced by £1. Well, just a little bit. Every little bit helps.
But a 10% reduction in ticket price means 10% less profit unless they can get 10% more students. Do you think that's a realistically achievable figure for Stagecoach?
It doesn't even have to be 10%. Even if it's just like a 10p reduction, which is just 5%, I'm sure there would be more students that would be willing to come into campus and using the buses more.
I mean, alternatively, is there a way to fight for subsidisation, maybe from the Students' Union or the university, to cover part of the cost of bus tickets? Is that an achievable goal? Do you think that's in the budget of either the university or the Students' Union?
I think it could be possible, but until we know what the budget of the Students' Union and the university looks like next year, we can't really say anything about that.
Now, the third major pledge in your manifesto has been about involving colleges more and activities more as well. Could you explain in more detail precisely what you have in mind?
Yeah, so over the last few months, Cerys has changed the office structure, and there's 4 FTO positions now instead of the 6 that were there last year, which means that colleges fall under the responsibility of the president.
Yeah, but what precisely would you have in mind to engage colleges more?
For example, the FTOs have press comm with the college presidents once a week, where you can talk about what you feel like should be changed and what could be better. And just even with Welcome Week, I know that LUSU and colleges have their own separate events, but maybe tying them in together and working with a bigger budget to provide events that suit and tailor to the students of the different colleges would help.
So as president of Grisdale, you're at Prescom every week.
I am at Prescom every week.
What could be changed? What could be better?
A lot of different things could be better and a lot of different things could be changed. For example, one small thing I can think of is JCR officers. The people that are like in the positions now feel like we aren't getting enough support from the Students' Union, but that has changed over this year and we are getting a little bit more support than we previously did. And just recognising the work that these JCR officers do and helping them deliver better events. Maybe providing them with a bigger budget, because the budgets currently are not as big as they used to be.
I mean, of course, the problem always with budget is that the cash has to come from somewhere. Do you think LUSU has got the money available to be spending more on colleges and JCRs? And if not, where would you be taking the money from?
I'm sure LUSU would have some way of finding more budget for the JCRs, because without the colleges are like one of the big selling points for the university. It's one of the main identities of being at Lancaster, that you have a college and the college is like your small family. Without giving these colleges enough money to fund events that foster this family environment, it's just taking away from the purpose of the colleges.
You talked as well about wanting to involve societies more. Do you think as president that would be in your remit, or would that fall to the activities officer? And if so, how would you work with the activities officer to deliver this?
So the president leads the FTO team. So as president, I want to make sure that the activities officer, who has a lot more on their plate this year, because it's no longer societies and media and sport, it's one big position. I'm sure I want to help them have the support that they need to deliver on their goals and give better support to sports teams, give better support to societies.
And precisely how would you do that?
For example, just simple things like maybe having societies presidents meet more often, just so all of them are connected in some way and know what's going on with the other societies, and even with sports teams. Speaking speaking to the sports centre to reduce booking charges for pitches and courts and things like that, to just make it more affordable place for people to find their identities.
And speaking as a person who, if you won the election, would be leading this new team of 4 officers, are you pleased with the changes that have been made? Do you think that 4 is the right number of FTOs to have?
I feel like Cerys spoke to all of the presidents before she passed the motion on, and I've heard what ideas she had and how she thinks it would work, and compared to other universities, I feel like it's a good amount of officers, and it should be enough for the officers to make a change, because the officers are more of a political role where you can represent the people, and reducing those 2 officers means there's more budget for operational staff to be hired, which could carry out on like the day-to-day jobs while the FTOs fight the bigger battles that are going on.
Well, you talked about the fact that the activities officer would have quite a lot on their plate because it's absorbing the roles of both societies, media and sports. Do you think that's too much for one person to take on, or do you think it's a manageable workload?
That's how the office structure used to be until a few years ago, where it was split into sports and societies and media. So it's been done by people before, and now that we don't have the union development position, that frees up budget to hire operational staff who can carry out on the day-to-day activities and support the activities officer in all their endeavours. And so I do feel like it is possible with operational staff.
And if you were elected, would you commit to keeping this FTO structure, or would you consider changing it?
I would only consider changing it if I see that it doesn't work. Until I see that it doesn't work, I'm not committed to changing it.
You've talked, of course, about how, as president of Grisdale, you've been attending Prescom meetings, and that means regular contact with the president of LUSU. Are there any other ways?
It's currently union development that we have at Prescom.
Excuse me, yeah. But are there any other ways in which you think being president of a JCR has prepared you well for the role?
Yeah. Being president of my college JCR means that I've learned to fight for what we need and fight for what we think would help better our events over the past year. I'm not afraid to say what I want and say what's required for the college, and I'm not going to keep quiet if something needs to be changed.
And that means you'll be prepared to stand up to the university if you need to?
Yeah.
Now, on the subject of strikes, it looks like there won't be any strikes in this academic year. The dispute over pensions has been resolved, and the one over pay and working conditions, there wasn't enough of a turnout on the ballot for lecturers to continue to strike. But there is always the potential for strikes in the future, especially because that matter remains unresolved. If there were to be more strikes over lecturers' pay, would you support the UCU?
I would support what I feel is right at the time.
What do you feel is right?
I feel like it is important for lecturers to be paid what they deserve, because they are doing really good work delivering these lectures and leading the students into a better future.
And you think that the current pay for academic staff is sufficient?
I feel like it could always be improved. Academic staff is one of the most important roles that you could have as a job in this world.
And of course, as president of the SU, you'll be standing up not just for undergraduate students, but for postgraduate students, some of whom are employed by the university as teaching assistants as well. And that means that they've got dual representation in both LUSU and the UCU. Do you think your position on the strikes would allow you to adequately represent postgraduate students who might want to strike for better pay?
Yeah, even with postgraduate students, we, on Prescom, the PG board, which is the representatives of Graduate College, where they're also involved. So working with them and knowing what they need would also help me support them.
Aside from the key points in your manifesto, are there any other promises or pledges or ideas which you'd want to work to implement as president?
I do want to work to give colleges better representation, and in terms of just supporting them in what they need and getting budgets back to what they used to be pre-COVID, because I do believe colleges are currently working on COVID budgets.
How can you improve representation for colleges in the Students' Union?
I feel like until this year, a lot of the times colleges were just taken for granted, and knowing that these colleges are now going to be there and play such a pivotal role in big events like Welcome Week and even whatever's happening with Xtrav. They play a big role in how the university works and providing a good university experience for students, and they do need the representation.
But precisely how would they get that additional representation, do you think?
I feel like a good step that Cerys has taken currently is having them there at Union Assembly, college presidents at Union Assembly, so we can vote on changes being made in LUSU currently.
That's a step your opponent's taken. What would you do if you were elected?
Having them in more meetings, maybe with university staff, maybe like someone on the university experiences team, and telling them to voice their concerns to someone on the university team when it's coming straight from students and not someone who's staff on LUSU would be a good step to bridge the gap between university and the students that the university is catering to.
And is there anything else you'd like to say before the end of the interview?
No, I think I've covered everything I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you very, very much, Shlok.
Thank you so much.